This is Masechet Bava Kama, Daf Lamed Bet Amud Aleph, at the bottom of the Amud, at the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Shnayim shahayu mahalchim b'shur rabim, two people who are going in the public. Echad ratz ve'echad mahalech. One of them is running and one's walking. Running down the street, two pedestrians, one's running, one is walking. O shahayu shnehem ratzim, or alternatively, case B is that they're both running. V'hiziku zeh zeh, and unfortunately they collided with one another and harmed each other. So the Mishnah says simply, shnehem pturim. Both of them are exempt from paying damages to each other. They're both not responsible. It was an accident, and they're both exempt. Neither one is considered to be responsible, whether they were both doing the same thing, both running, or if only one was running and one was walking, considering the fact that it's legal to run in public domain. If an accident happens, it's considered an accident, and they're both patur. The Gemara begins, Matnitin delo ki'isi ben Yehuda. This Mishnah, although it sounds simple, is not undisputed. And Isi ben Yehuda, the Tana, would disagree with the Mishnah. The Tanya, where do we know Isi ben Yehuda? Isi ben Yehuda Omer. In the Braita, Isi ben Yehuda says, Ratz chayav mipnei shehu mishuna. The one who is running, Isi ben Yehuda says, is the one who's responsible. Because he is mishuna, he is doing the thing which is not the norm. If you go out to the street and count the people who are walking and the people who are running, you'll find that the vast majority of pedestrians are walking. And therefore, if someone is running, he is doing something which is an aberration. Maybe it's legal, but it's unusual. And since he is the one who's doing something out of the ordinary, he is responsible for the damages that occur in the accidents. He has to be more careful. Umoda isi be'erev Shabbat ben hashmashot, but Isi would agree, the Gemara says, that if it was erev Shabbat ben hashmashot, right as a twilight on Friday night, as Shabbat begins, shehu patur, that the running pedestrian is patur, because nefnei sheratz bershut, because then it's bershut, then it's allowable, or perhaps it's expected that people are running to greet Shabbat or to prepare for Shabbat, and therefore, if you're running, you're doing the norm, and therefore you're not responsible for damages. So what the Gemara is saying is that Isi believes that the ratz is chayav because it's an aberration, but only when it's an aberration. And if it's a situation where it's the norm, if he's running on a track in the public domain, obviously he's bershut and he's not responsible. Amar Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan the Amora says, Halacha ki Isi ben Yehuda. We paskin like Isi. We paskin that the ratz is mishuna and is chayav. Challenges the Gemara, Miyamar Rabbi Yochanan hachi, does Rabbi Yochanan possibly say this? V'ha'amar Rabbi Yochanan, halacha kistam mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan paskins like the anonymous, undisputed mishnah. Meaning Rabbi Yochanan, as a matter of principle, as a rule, always paskins like a mishnah in which there's no dispute. If the mishnah is stated unequivocally, it must be that is indeed the halacha. Utnan, and our mishnah is undisputed. Echad ratz ve'echad mahalech, o shayu shneim ratzim pturim. Our mishnah says, stam mishnah, undisputed, that they're patur. So how can Rabbi Yochanan paskin like Isi ben Yehuda, at the same time always paskin like an anonymous, undisputed mishnah? So the Gemara says we can resolve the contradiction. Matnitin be'erev Shabbat ben hashmashot. Our Mishnah is talking about the case where Isi would agree. Our Mishnah is speaking about a case of erev Shabbat during the twilight time, when Isi would agree that they are patur. But our Mishnah agrees with him that if it's not Erev Shabbat, then it's Meshuna and it's Chayav. Mimai, the Gemara challenges itself. How do I know that this is a legitimate reinterpretation of our Mishnah? Midukatani, from the fact that the Mishnah has two different cases. Midukatani, because it says, "Oh, shahayu shnehem ratzim pturim." The Mishnah gave a case B, where they're both running, and in that case they're both patur. Hatu lamali. Why is it even necessary to have this case of shnehem ratzim? Hashta echad ratz ve'echad mahalech patur. Once we already know that when one is running and one is walking, they are patur. Shnehem ratzim, if they're both running, mibaya, is it necessary? If the runner is patur when he crashes into a pedestrian who's walking, kal v'chomer, he's patur if he collides with a pedestrian who's also running. The second case is completely superfluous. Ela hachikamar, therefore we must reinterpret the Mishnah, that there's two different scenarios here. And by reconciling the need for the two scenarios, we will also support the possibility that Rabbi Yochanan's reinterpretation is correct, and that our Mishnah is talking about Erev Shabbat. And this is now the Gemara will tell you how we should read the Mishnah. Echad ratz ve'echad mahalech patur. The first case is that one runner and one walker, the runner is patur. But when is the Mishnah referring in the first case? Be'erev Shabbat ben hashmashot, the case of Erev Shabbat. Aval b'chol, but the Mishnah agrees if it would be a weekday. Echad ratz ve'echad mahalech chayav. This exact scenario would be chayav. Shneim ratzim, the second case of the Mishnah comes to say, if they're both running, then afilu b'chol, even if it would be a weekday, they would both be patur. So the novelty of the second case of the Mishnah is referring specifically to the weekday, while the novelty of the first half of the Mishnah is referring specifically to the Erev Shabbat case. Essentially, what the Gemara does is it reinterprets the Mishnah by adding in a clause. Echad ratz ve'echad mahalech patur. The ratio of the Mishnah in the first case. But when is it referring to? Erev Shabbat ben hashmashot. Aval b'chol echad ratz ve'echad mahalech chayav. This should be interpreted as explanation, or implied explanation. The second half of the Mishnah, Shneim ratzim, is referring to chol. Then they are patur, because since they both deviated from the norm, they are neutralized and they are patur. The Gemara continues. Amar Mar, we stated previously, Moda Isi Erev Shabbat ben hashmashot patur. We stated previously that Isi agrees. We're going all the way back to here. That Isi agrees that even though the Meshuna is chayav, he agrees that Erev Shabbat, where it's the norm, he is patur. My bershut ika. Why is that the norm? The Gemara wants to know. Just curious. Why is it the norm to run on Erev Shabbat? Kid Rabbi Chanina. The answer is that Rabbi Chanina explained why it's the norm to run on Erev Shabbat. The Amar Rabbi Chanina would say, we turn to Lamed Bet Amud Bet, Bo'u v'neitzei likrat kala malchata. Let's go greet the bride, the queen. V'amri lo likrat Shabbat kala malchata. Or he said Shabbat, the bride, that we go out to greet a bride of Shabbat, and apparently we'd have to run to get out there. Rabbi Yanai, the Gemara concludes, would wrap himself in a garment and say, Bo'u kala, let's greet the bride, let's greet the bride.